There's something about late 90s high school that just looks cinematic. The glow of fluorescent lights bouncing off polished hallways, the clack of lockers echoing between classes, and that sense that something just beneath the surface wasn't quite right. In December of 1998, that feeling came to life in The Faculty, a movie that felt like The Breakfast Club crashed headfirst into Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Robert Rodriguez directed it. Kevin Williamson wrote it. Together, they took every cliche from the teen genre, the jock, the nerd, the rebel, the outcast, and twisted them into something sinister. It was the ultimate what if your teachers were aliens fever dream, but it also hit deeper than that. Because underneath the blood and body snatchers, The Faculty was really all about control, about how easy it is to lose yourself in a system that wants everyone to think, act, and dress the same. It was a time when teen horror was booming. Scream had just changed everything, and Hollywood was obsessed with making high school scary again. But The Faculty wasn't just another slasher. It was science fiction with swagger, a movie that blended paranoia, punk rock, and teen angst all into one caffeine-fueled story about survival. You could feel the Y2K tension humming in the background, fear of conformity, of invasion, of growing up in a world that felt too connected for comfort. The soundtrack roared with alt-rock rebellion. The cast was impossibly cool, and the tone walked a tightrope between horror and humor. This wasn't just a movie about aliens taking over a school. It was a snapshot of 1998, a generation learning that real monsters weren't always from outer space. Sometimes they were already in the classroom. By the late 1990s, horror had crawled out of its slump and put on a leather jacket. The genre that once ruled the 70s and 80s with slashers, monsters, and midnight screenings had grown quiet. But then came Scream in 1996, and suddenly, teenagers were back in the driver's seat of fear. Kevin Williamson's self-aware script didn't just revive horror, it redefined it. It told audiences that it was okay to know the rules, to be in on the joke, and to still get scared anyway. Hollywood noticed. Almost overnight, the studios were chasing the same adrenaline. Horror stories set in high schools, starring young, beautiful casts, and written with a wink. You had I Know What You Did Last Summer, Urban Legend, Disturbing Behavior, and The Faculty, all orbiting the same cultural mood, glossy, fast-talking, a little rebellious, and just self-aware enough to feel fresh. But The Faculty had something different pulsing through it. It wasn't about a masked killer or a vengeful ghost. It was about invasion, about what happens when normal people start acting strange, and the only ones who notice are the kids that society tends to ignore. It played on the universal teenage fear that nobody believes you, that adults are all just pretending to care. It was a perfect storm, a script from the hottest horror writer in the world, a young cast of rising stars, and a director who made From Dusk Till Dawn look like a comic book fever dream. The result was something slick, loud, and weirdly smart. A horror movie made for kids who felt too smart for horror movies. And as audiences would soon find out, this wasn't your average after-school nightmare. This was the new face of teenage horror. Alien, confident, and unmistakably 1998. Behind the eerie glow of Harrington High, The Faculty was a meeting of creative minds who probably shouldn't have worked so perfectly together, but somehow did. It started with a script by David Wechter and Bruce Kimmel, a straightforward alien invasion story that sat gathering dust since the early 90s. Then Dimension Films, fresh off the success of Scream, handed it to their golden writer, Kevin Williamson. He tore it apart, stitched it back together, and turned it into a razor-sharp blend of sci-fi paranoia and teen rebellion. Enter Robert Rodriguez, the Texan indie maverick who made El Mariachi on a shoestring budget and turned From Dusk Till Dawn into a cult hit. He brought a kinetic comic book visual style that gave The Faculty its pulse. You can feel his fingerprints in every frame, the hyperspeed cuts, the exaggerated action, the wild humor balanced with genuine tension. Casting was another masterstroke. Josh Hartnett, all messy hair and misfit energy, as Zeke, the brilliant burnout. Elijah Wood, the earnest outsider before The Lord of the Rings made him a household name. Jordana Brewster, Clea DuVall, Sean Hatosi, Laura Harris, all fresh faces who embodied that late 90s mix of angst and irony. And then the adults. Famke Janssen, Robert Patrick, Piper Laurie, Salma Hayek, a Faculty lineup that oozed character before they even turned alien. Shot mostly in Austin, Texas, the movie looked like Middle America, but felt like something else entirely. A small town on the edge of a nervous breakdown. Between the explosions, the sci-fi goo, and the punk rock swagger, The Faculty had all the makings of a B-movie that didn't know it was smarter than it looked. It wasn't just a film set in a school. It was a laboratory where 1990s pop culture ran wild. Harrington High looked like every high school in America, and that was exactly the point. The football field, the trophy cases, the smell of the wet grass, and teenage boredom. The faculty nailed that sense of familiarity so precisely that it almost felt like deja vu. But under Robert Rodriguez's camera, the hallways weren't just hallways anymore. They were battlegrounds. The characters walked straight out of a John Hughes lineup. The jock, the nerd, the goth, the queen bee, and the burnout. But this wasn't detention in the Breakfast Club. It was survival. Each archetype represented a corner of the social ecosystem, and as the invasion spread, those walls began to crumble. Suddenly, the quarterback was fighting beside the outcast. The cheerleader was confessing she wasn't who she pretended to be, and the cool kid was the only one asking the right questions. There was a strange comfort in that chaos. The film understood something about high school that most movies didn't, that everyone's pretending. The students, the teachers, and even the parents. Everyone's wearing a mask, trying to pass as normal, terrified of being found out. So when the aliens began taking over, it wasn't just a sci-fi metaphor, it was a mirror. It asked, what if conformity really was contagious? The setting made it believable. The gym felt like a war zone, the classroom felt like a trap, and the locker-lined corridors became something eerie, sterile, and unsettling, a symbol of the way institutions condition people to obey. By grounding the invasion in a place we all recognized, the faculty blurred the line between the ordinary and the uncanny. It made paranoia feel possible, and in 1998, that was a feeling that hit a little too close to home. On the surface, the faculty was about an alien invasion, but underneath, it was about something far scarier, the slow, silent fear of losing yourself. It took the classic Body Snatchers formula and ran it through the psyche of 1990s adolescence, where every teenager felt like they were being taken over by something. Pressure, hormones, expectations, and the invisible pull to fit in. When the teachers start acting different, colder, sharper, and wrong, it's more than just a horror. It's a metaphor. Authority figures who seem inhuman. Adults who stop listening. Systems that pretend to care, but quietly consume you. Harrington High wasn't just a school. It was a living organism feeding on its students' identities. Each character's transformation or resistance carried that emotional weight. Casey, the quiet observer, fights to stay himself in a world that keeps trying to redefine him. Delilah hides insecurity behind a magazine-perfect mask. Zeke rejects everything, rules, authority, and even friendship, because independence is the only thing that makes him feel real. The parasites didn't just represent alien life, they represented surrender. Robert Rodriguez and Kevin Williamson understood the brilliance of using sci-fi as subtext. It wasn't just, what if aliens invaded our school? It was, what if being normal is the invasion? It's why the film hit harder than people expected. Beneath the quippy dialogue and slick editing was a real sense of dread, the kind that came from recognizing yourself in the story. In a decade obsessed with image, the faculty turned conformity into a monster you could see. It was the quiet part out loud. Sometimes growing up feels like being replaced. And sometimes, the only way to survive is to stay weird enough to not get caught. If the story gave the faculty its paranoia, the soundtrack gave it its pulse. This wasn't just background noise. It was a mixtape of late 90s rebellion, from The Offspring to Oasis, stabbing westward to garbage. Every track felt ripped from a burned CD spinning in a Discman covered with band stickers. You could almost hear the hum of a dial-up modem between guitar riffs. This was a movie made for the generation raised on MTV and Alternative Nation. The soundtrack thumped with angst and alienation. Songs about not belonging, about breaking free, about not trusting anyone over 30. When The Offspring's The Kids Aren't Alright kicked in, it didn't just underscore a scene, it summarized the entire film. The music became emotional subtext, the sound of rebellion echoing through the hallways of conformity. Even the quieter moments carried that edge. A cover of Pink Floyd's Another Brick in the Wall by Class of '99, a supergroup with members from Rage Against the Machine and Alice in Chains, was practically the movie's thesis statement. We don't need no education. Hit different when sung over footage of teachers who were literally not human. It was a perfect, ironic anthem for a movie about fighting back against the system, whether that system was a school board, your parents, or something extraterrestrial. In the late 1990s, soundtracks mattered. They weren't just add-ons, they were cultural artifacts. The faculty's track list was a time capsule of that moment, when grunge had splintered into alt-rock and teenage rebellion had a marketable rhythm. It wasn't about trying to be timeless. It was proudly of its time, loud, messy, and defiant. The kind of music that made you want to skip class, roll the windows down, and believe just for one song that you could outrun whatever is coming. When the faculty hit theaters on November 12, 1998, it arrived like a weird early Christmas gift from another planet. A movie that blended teen drama, sci-fi paranoia, and slasher attitude into something nobody quite knew how to label. Critics weren't sure what to make of it. Some thought it was too self-aware, too ironic, too glossy. Others saw it for what it really was, a love letter to every alien invasion story ever told, reimagined for the MTV generation. At the box office, it didn't scream blockbuster, but it made money, around $40 million worldwide, but it was overshadowed by the very films that helped create it. Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer had already dominated the pop culture conversation. By late 1998, the teen horror wave was starting to crest, and audiences were turning toward the next big thing. But even then, the faculty lingered, like a strange memory you couldn't shake. What made it special was how confidently it mixed tones. It was campy but sharp, absurd but smart. It didn't take itself too seriously, yet it wasn't afraid to tap into real fears about identity, authority, and trust. And for viewers who grew up in that era, it felt oddly authentic. The slang, the sneakers, the soundtrack. It was high school life filtered through a sci-fi lens. Over time, those early mixed reviews aged into appreciation. What once seemed too stylized now felt perfectly 90s. What once felt like a copycat now feels like a snapshot. A film that captured a fleeting cultural moment between Generation X cynicism and millennial anxiety. It may have not scared everyone back then, but for those who were paying attention, the faculty became something more. A cult favorite that refused to play by the rules it was parodying. Time has a way of reshaping how we see movies, and the faculty is one of those films that got better with age. What was once dismissed as just another teen horror cash-in slowly evolved into something beloved. A cult classic for the generation that grew up renting it on VHS or catching it during late-night cable marathons. Part of that endurance comes from how deeply it understood its audience. The faculty wasn't trying to scare adults. It was whispering directly to the teenagers who felt alien long before the aliens arrived. For kids who spent the late 90s feeling disconnected, skeptical, or too smart for the system, this movie hit like a mirror. It said, "You're not crazy. The world really is pretending." Streaming culture and social media only amplified its afterlife. Clips resurfaced, fans rediscovered it, and suddenly, those familiar faces, Josh Hartnett, Elijah Wood, Clea DuVall, Jordana Brewster, looked like a high school yearbook of pre-fame icons. Its aesthetic, grainy gym lights, chain wallet fashion, post-grunge sound, became pure nostalgia fuel. People didn't just rewatch The Faculty for the scares, they rewatched it for the vibe. And that's what separates cult classics from forgotten curiosities. The movie feels handcrafted for the era, but timeless in emotion. It's messy, confident, and full of heart. It gave us an alien invasion story that somehow felt personal, like a metaphor we didn't realize we were living through. Today, it's not uncommon to see The Faculty cited alongside Scream, The Craft, and Idle Hands as part of the perfect storm of late 90s teen horror, a genre born from rebellion, irony, and the unspoken truth that sometimes high school really does feel like the end of the world. The Faculty closes the way that all great teen horror movies do, not with total victory, but with the uneasy survival. The students win, sure, but the world feels different now. The air is still thick with paranoia, and the hallways still hum with secrets. That's what makes it stick. The idea that maybe the invasion never really ended. Maybe it just got smarter. Looking back, the film feels like a time capsule of an era when pop culture still believed in outsiders. Before social media blurred every identity. Before the world got algorithmically connected. The Faculty celebrated the misfits who refused to plug in. It told us that rebellion wasn't a phase. It was survival. There's a reason that people keep coming back to it decades later. Beneath the alien goo and explosive finale, it captured something timeless about being young and suspicious of the world. That feeling when you look around and think everyone's changing, and not in a good way. When you start to wonder if normal is just another word for gone. Robert Rodriguez and Kevin Williamson gave us a movie that's more than horror. It's a metaphor wearing a Leatherman jacket. It's a snapshot of the late 90s cool, mixed with something heavier. A warning about what happens when individuality becomes the enemy. Because in the end, The Faculty isn't really about aliens at all. It's about resistance. About staying awake when everyone else falls in line. About holding on to everything that makes you weird, messy, curious, and alive. And that final message still echoes long after the credits roll. Don't let them take you. Never blend in.